Welcome to the CUFI Weekly. I'm Kasim Hafiz. So, hope you had a great July 4th weekend, but we've got to remember that it's more than barbecues and spending time with your friends. July 4th marks, of course, American Independence Day, and this July 4th I was really thinking about what that means. As somebody who wasn't born in the United States, as you can probably tell from my accent, and have spent most of my life living in other countries, primarily the UK and Canada, living in America has been quite the experience. But for me, it's been incredible because of what America represents. It represents freedom. What those men signed in 1776 essentially changed the world. It changed at how we look at government, and it changed at how we look at freedom and democracy. And I think that's really important. Now, why am I bringing that up? Because when I look at Israel today, our closest ally in the Middle East, we see these strange parallels which sometimes don't even occur to me. Freedom from the British. The United States, we got freedom from the British. Israel, it was reborn in the land after shaking off British rule. And then we look at the freedoms, the democracy, and we see there are so many parallels. So July 4th is also the date that a group of Israelis and a group of Jewish hostages were returned to Israel from Entebbe in Uganda. So I don't know if you've heard of this before, but many years ago, a group of hijackers, they hijacked an Air France plane and took it to, I believe from Greece, to Entebbe, Uganda. There, they separated the hostages, Jews in one room, the non-Jews in another. And eventually, they ended up freeing most of the non-Jewish hostages, but the Jewish hostages, they didn't. The group was made of PFLP terrorists and other European terrorist groups. Now, given that situation, Israel decided it had to act. If you ever read the history about what's called Operation Thunderbolt or Operation Yonatan, after the late brother of former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who was killed in the operation, Israel made a decision. They refused to allow, one, to concede to terrorists, two, to allow Jewish people once again to be separated and essentially set up for slaughter. Israel made one of the most tactically significant and most daring operations in history. It flew commandos from Israel to Entebbe, Uganda, storming the airport where they were being held, and brought them home to Israel. They landed on July 4th. Now, why do I bring that up? Because even today, this was in the 1970s, even today, Israel is still facing terrorism. Israel has time after time had to adapt to defeat terrorism. And the thing is, it doesn't always make the news. Yes, in our first episode, we talked about the rockets from Hamas. We talked about how Israel was responding. But this is every day. If it's not attempted knife attacks, if it's not incendiary devices being sent over from Gaza, every single day, Israel's enemies are plotting and trying to kill Israelis. And every single day, Israel is having to innovate, work harder, and do what it can to, one, preserve freedom and human rights in its country, but also to protect its citizens from terror. We have a luxury here where we can look away. When it's not in the media, when it's not being blasted on social media, we almost act like the conflict isn't happening. Like there aren't people trying to kill Israeli civilians. Like there aren't, right now as I speak, children in Gaza who are going to Hamas camps to train to be future terrorists. I mean, that's horrific for the children of Gaza. They deserve better. But this is every day for Israel and has been since its rebirth. Dealing with terrorism, having to be better, having to be faster, because for Israel, it has to win every single day. For the terrorists, they need one win and Israeli civilians die. And I bring this back to the US-Israel relationship because it is our support. It is US's steadfast support of Israel which has allowed incredible technologies like the Iron Dome to be developed. Something which saves Israeli lives. Something which changes so much in the field of conflict. When we think about weapons, we think about things which kill, maim, and harm. Thanks to US support, Israel has been able to develop technology which protects Israeli civilians. And sadly, when we talk about the US-Israel relationship, there are people who want to change that. There are people who believe that we shouldn't stand with Israel, that we shouldn't stand with a democratic, free nation in the Middle East. Let me say this to you. When you hear people talk about the Israel-US relationship, when you hear people denigrate this relationship, that we in America are somehow making a mistake by supporting Israel, make sure you tell them the facts. When people throw out absurd statements like, well, we give $3 billion of aid to Israel when we don't have free healthcare. Free healthcare in the United States is not going to cost $3 billion. It's going to cost a lot more. I'm not an economist. I'm really bad with numbers, but I can tell you that. And for those who don't realize this, that aid that Israel is given comes right back to the United States. A majority of that aid has to be spent in America, on American products, on American services. So that money is coming back to the United States. It's making jobs in Virginia and these small towns and all over the country. The US-Israel relationship has been incredible and beneficial to both countries. I know, without a shadow of a doubt, Israeli technology is protecting American soldiers in the battlefield as we speak. Israeli technology has saved American lives in the battlefield. As I said before, when people talk about the Israel-America relationship, they need to understand. They need to understand that this is more than just a transactional relationship. This is a friendship. This is a bond. This is two countries who stand with each other. And even in tragedy, we saw just a week ago when the tragic events happened in Florida, Israel sent a team. We can go back before that, when New Orleans, Hurricane Katrina, Israel was one of the first countries to send support. Make sure you know these facts. Make sure you learn the details. Again, go to CUFI.org. We have plenty of information because these are the arguments that are being made. These are the stories that you're just not being told. People are telling you half the story, and sadly, that's creating hatred and animosity and giving people the wrong impression of what is actually happening. So until next week, take care of yourselves, take care of each other. God bless you. This is Kasim for the CUFI Weekly. For Zion's sake, do not remain silent. Thanks for checking out today's episode of CUFI Weekly. If you enjoyed this episode and want to stay up to date with the latest news from the Middle East along with topics involving US-Israel relations, please be sure to like and subscribe. And remember to click that notification button so that you are notified every time a new show is uploaded.